Welcome to another episode of the AI in Manufacturing podcast here on Industry 4.0 TV. I'm your host, Kudzai Manditereza. In this episode, we'll discuss building a knowledge graph context layer for industrial AI. And my guest on this episode is 𝗹𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀𝘀𝘁, who is the co-founder and CEO of Thread. Bob, it's great to have you on this podcast today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Yeah, good to be here, Kudzai. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. So let's start with you telling us a bit about yourself and what's your background and what led you to founding Thread.
Okay, well, by my accent, you probably think, where's he from? I'm from New Zealand, so from the other side of the world. But my surname is a Dutch one. So I was born in the Netherlands, immigrated to New Zealand. My professional background for most of my career has actually been non-technical, has been in doing operational strategy and implementation. I've had my own consulting business for about 25 years, and prior to that, I was working in Europe for a big consulting firm. And really the approach was that we would work with large organizations to really affect change from the shop floor all the way up to the senior suite, and really laying the foundations for them to lift their businesses to that next level. And underpinning all of that, obviously, was this data. Can you present data in a way that asks good questions, leads to good questions, better accountability, better visibility over performance, and then we can start to confront the facts. Sometimes they're brutal facts, but once you start to build that clarity over what's important and how you measure it, and can you build a common language around those measures, that was really the modus operandi of my consulting business. About 6 years ago, we were obviously becoming more and more aware of this fourth industrial revolution, and we were like, well, we want to be part of that, and we think we've got something to say about that. And Thread's been in business for 6 years now. We began really doing projects, and in the subsequent lockdowns, we conceived of a product that we felt addressed a real fundamental problem in this space. And we've worked very hard in getting that product now to be launched, and we'll talk about that later in terms of going to 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀𝘁 in a week's time, and hopefully launching this with a number of innovation partners.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Really excited to unpack all of that with you today. So I mean, as you pointed out, really we've seen this push by manufacturers as far as Industry 4.0 is concerned, where they're investing heavily in collecting OT data, with obviously the goal to, as you mentioned, to try and unearth all these, truth or the brutal truth, right? And the reality, though, is that many of these manufacturers are still struggling to extract this value from the data that they are collecting or they've been collecting for many years. So I'd like to get a sense from your perspective, what do you think is the root cause of this challenge?
That is a very good question. I feel as though when Industry 4 was uttered, however, 15 years ago, everyone went, well, all right, we've got the technology now to connect the data, move the data, and present the data, and everything else is kind of straightforward and easy. And there was massive hype, and the Gartner hype cycle. I think we've hit a bit of a trough of disillusionment. Maybe that's kind of been the AI revolution's probably kind of not made the trough so low, but fundamentally, the thing that we found was that just because you can get the data and even present it, people don't use it because they can't make sense of it in a more broader context of human learning and an improvement. And so even what we've noticed over the last 2 years, people have started to talk about context, but then they grossly simplify context and they go, oh, well, it's straightforward, just a bit of context and yeah, we do context. But what we're seeing with our client is they're still struggling to make sense of what their data is telling them. And I think what has really been missing is not just to understand context, but to do it in a way that really follows organizational learning and the realities of what actually happens in factories. Your average production manager comes in the morning, they have about 50 needles to find in the haystack. They do that by reading their shift report, then they go to their daily meeting, then they go, okay, guys, what's happened? And then people might say the KPIs, and then they go, okay, but why did that happen? And you have a number of questions that eventually things just get ambiguous. And it's really, really difficult to get to the bottom of things. And then you look around the room and everyone's kind of looking at each other, and it's, the old manufacturing coat of arms, as we call it. It's his fault. It's maintenance's fault. And then you go, all right, well, why don't we stay behind? We'll go and do a root cause analysis. And then you might draw a fishbone on the whiteboard. And then you go, well, yeah, it could be that, or it could be this. How will we know? Well, we've got the data. I think we've got the data. Have we? Have we got the data? Oh, maybe not. Oh, we could throw a data logger on there. And everything is hard. Everything is difficult. And no matter how much you've engineered the data, you don't know where the thinking is going to go. And for me, that is context. Context sort of reveals itself through problem solving, through conversation, through language, through understanding the connection of things. And what we see is a lot of clients are frustrated. They spent all this money, yet that moment of truth, when they're asking good questions of their people and getting hopefully to root causes that lead to improvement actions, they're still stuck. They still haven't addressed that. And then people walk out of the room going, well, I guess we'll never know. And then the next day, they've got another 50 needles to find in the haystack. So that's the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super interesting, and I would like to sort of like dive into this topic of context. So we'll get to exactly what that really means fundamentally. But as you mentioned, when Industry 4.0 was sort of like coined 15 years ago, we had obviously this trough of disillusionment. But I think around about 6 years or 5 years ago, we started to get these new breed of industrial platforms that are more focused on what we call industrial data ops, whose goal really was to try and solve that problem. So maybe for folks who might be new to this term or this space, can you first of all help us understand what is industrial data ops, what are the problems that it was meant to solve, and where are we on that journey of trying to address the context within our data?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really is industrial data ops is everything from getting the data pipelines to reliably moving that data, to storing it, to managing that data, to defining that data, whether it's unified namespace or context definition. It all falls under that umbrella of industrial data ops. The outcome, the proof in the eating of the pudding, is that you can use your factory data to to solve problems, to automate decisions, to bring it to the enterprise IT layer where you can connect a whole lot more dots that you didn't think were possible. That would be my broad definition of industrial data ops.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you mentioned this, and I struggle with this as well, where everyone kind of like throws around this word context, and it doesn't seem to me, at least, that everyone has got the same understanding of what they actually mean when they talk about context. Some are talking about just putting units of measurement, some are talking about, okay, who was actually working on this piece of machine as being that context. So maybe can you help us define fundamentally, when we talk about context in an industrial setting, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, I come from it maybe from a different angle. I before I went into the real world, I was an academic, and I was very much a social scientist. I was interested, and I came much more from a sociological, social anthropological aspect and philosophy, where we looked at things such as ontology and epistemology in a very different way. But really, for me, that has informed my understanding of context. For me, context is something that we do using language, and we understand things through the relationships of words with other words, and we build meaning through a combination of words that are linked together in a certain way. Those words are used to represent the world, the physical world, but also the abstract world. So, who's Kudzai? Where's he from? Who are his parents? What sport does he play? All of that is context. And we build that context through conversation, through narratives that form in our head. When we look at things such as data, people begin with metadata and data ontology, and they make it very simple. They say, look, we're going into defining these raw tags. We're going to define the name. We're going to give some metadata definitions. I'm going to give some basic data ontology, and you are good to go. My view is you're not good to go. That's not how it works. And OT data is probably the most difficult data to bring to that language of words where we can build coherent narratives about what's happening. If you look at other sources of data, business data, you already have a lot more words that create that early meaning. For raw OT data, where you're looking at sensors and states and temperatures and things like that, you actually have to do a whole lot of work to build that context. And so my view of context is the ability to understand what a data point does, what it relates to, and what it can mean. And that what it can mean can be a whole lot of things. One data point could mean something a whole lot different for a supply chain person than a production manager, than a reliability engineer. They have their own language. They have their own esoteric codified connections between how things work together. And so for me, context has to be that broad. Another point is that context isn't something that we just start with and we know everything. Context is learned, right? It's learned through call and response, question, answers. Okay, so what are you telling me? Oh, okay, right. Okay, so that would relate to. When we are doing that, conversationally, we are building context. And that context then has to be imparted back into that data layer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I would like to kind of like just more delve a bit deeper into that. because as you may very well know, there's been frameworks like ISA 95, which have, in a way tried to create that language of contents, even though it's still kind of like that rigid ontology, as you put it. But
Yeah.
just to help our audience try and understand where the challenges, come, can you kind of like explain to us how those rigid ontologies, specifically something like ISA 95, would maybe fail in a real world implementation or real world environment?
Well, there's so much difference and diversity in factories. For a while there, we thought, well, what if we can just do a one size fits all approach, and then that's encapsulated in standards? Uh, I think we run the danger of, if we pin it down to rigid standards, that we limit the amount of use we can get from data. And therefore, we have a different view. The standards are almost created by the act of building context and knowledge over time. And so that's the approach we're leaning into. How do you make sense of your factory? Well, you get some data and then you say, okay, what does that mean? Why is that important to me? Okay, it's important in this way and that way. And that's how you start to build context. It's not, here are your ISA 95 standards, follow that, follow the script. Yep, you've done that, tick. Okay, job is done, we've got context. I just don't think it works like that. And I think the evidence out there is that the speed of learning and improvement and application of data isn't happening to the way we expected. We thought it was straightforward, it's not. And so I think we need to find an approach where we can really deliver that speed of context learning in a more flexible manner.
Okay, so I mean, just so that we can get some more clarity on this, on exactly how context, as you mentioned, context is something that is not rigid, it's something that you build up over time. I want to get a sense on two key issues. First of all, help us paint a picture of exactly how that works in a, practically speaking, how that context will be built up in a shop floor environment. And then secondly, where is the balance? Because one of the pushbacks from people who are pro ISA 95 is that if you allow things to just show up and in an unstandard way, ungoverned way, it quickly becomes a wild west kind of situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So can you kind of like help us understand how does knowledge build up, and how do you sort of like make sure you keep everything in check so that you've got some enterprise wide you're able to correlate things from an enterprise wide perspective, as it were?
Yeah, and look, it is something that we grapple with, because people come back to us and say, well, that sounds like a free-for-all. Anyone can write any context. How do you know that you're not going to create nonsense, as you said, or contradictions? And in one part of your plant, you say the sky is blue, and on the other side of the plant, you say the sky is green. And somehow it's all just this ginormous mess of data. We have in our 3Cloud tool checks and balances to do that. And we can delve into that a bit deeper later. But going back to the context, our clients may go, well, this is great, let's do this. And we say, how many tags have you got? And they say 500,000 or 5 million or what have you. And they go, so how do we build context? Do we get all those tags and then what happens? Magic fairies form context? And you go, no. In fact, don't even worry about that many tags. Let's just figure out the ones that you think are important. And let's actually really spend the time figuring out how they can be useful. And then once you do that, then you get the feedback to say it's either useful or not, or it's useful, but we need to know a bit more. We always see that starting small with those key bits of information, when you've got the right ingredients in place of curiosity and urgency, and this is important because it's telling us something valuable, that triggers off a process of further context building. And once you've got your head around something to say, yep, it's useful, we measure it, it checks out, we've got it, you can scale that knowledge, right? And that's what we see. An OEE for one line, and you've figured it out, and you've understood the relationships, you might have an ability to scale that to another part of your plant. From a reliability maintenance point of view, you say, well, I've got a motor gearbox, I'm measuring vibration, I've got a failure mode, I'm really getting use of this. Oh, guess what? I've got 500 motor gearboxes. I can scale that context now. And so our view is start small, really test the context, understand the cause and effect relationships, validate them, do it very quickly, iteratively. Once you're happy, then you can scale to those 500,000 data tags. That's kind of how we answer that question. You know, context is about trust. Can I trust that the relationships I've built is telling me something meaningful, and I can reproduce that to keep giving me that meaningful information? And can I now build on that for further insights? And ISO 95 standards gives you a feeling of trust, but it's not the only way to build trust in your context. In our view, it's better to build something, test it, validate it, test it again, and then scale it.
Absolutely, that makes total sense. So now, before we, dive into your platform to understand a bit more on how exactly you provide the tooling to help with that kind of context building, I'd like us to talk about knowledge graphs, because I think this is what you leverage as that technology to help contextualize data in a way that actually mirrors how humans learn and kind of like build that understanding. So maybe can you kind of like explain to us that connection between why are knowledge graphs best suited for capturing this kind of contextualization?
Just trying to build context in a hierarchical tag structure eventually limits your ability to build very rich multi-dimensional context. A knowledge graph, you're able to draw relationships very easily, multiple relationships. You can make it very visual, and that then sort of reflects human cognition a whole lot easier than hierarchical context building. That's the short answer. I see the knowledge graph very much as a mind map of data and things that you're physically trying to represent on your factory floor, and then over top of that you're putting abstract concepts that aren't physical. They're not giving you an empirical sense of something that's happening, whether it's a temperature or a product count or what have you, but the ability to take physical tags in assets and show it within a knowledge graph and then draw relationships is how humans think. It's how language is put together in vocabulary and grammar. And so I just think it's a way more effective way of building context. And that's why I think it's the technology of the future for doing that context piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would like to kind of like just linger on that a bit, specifically for our audience who are more familiar with the concept of a unified namespace. Can you maybe draw parallels, or maybe can you help us understand how the unified namespace, as we all understand it, how it does it work hand in hand with knowledge graphs? If so, how, or what's the relationship there?
Uh, that is a really interesting discussion point, Kudzai. And when I'm at 𝗍𝗍𝗰𝘀𝘁, I think we're going to have lots of conversations about that. I think the unified namespace that that Walk has provided for 𝗍𝗍𝗰𝘀, actually, we've got in a knowledge graph, and it's shown some really interesting things. For me, the unified namespace is almost an outcome of a really well-built knowledge graph, actually, which is that you have confidence that what you've got on the factory floor has sort of been presented in a way that it can now be used for very powerful ways. So it's essentially achieving the same thing, and for me, the knowledge graph is an excellent method for building a unified namespace. So that would be my answer, if that does make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now let's talk more about your platform specifically. So maybe can you just kind of like give us an overview of what your platform is called, what it does, and kind of like just give us an introduction into it.
Okay, it's called Thread Cloud, so nice and straightforward. The point of the tool is to make it really, really easy for any manufacturer around the world to connect to their data. And this is currently, we're doing that via Ignition Gateway. It's not the only one. We've got other connectors, but we're really leaning into Ignition because of the way how easy it is. The customer can then get that data and visualize it very, very quickly within 15 minutes into a knowledge graph. The knowledge graph is presented in a way that your tag hierarchies, right, that show you different assets, are turned into boxes, right, that can then be configured and moved around and dragged to show your factory. They go, okay, here's my press, and here's my my packer, and here's my robot. So the first real benefit is, I can see all my data, where it is, in which assets, and I can start to configure my factory to make it sort of show how the data is laid out. Then once you've done that, you can look at your data points very quickly and go, great, I'm seeing events coming through, streaming through. Great, I've got confidence that I'm seeing live data. And then essentially the user interface allows you to draw a relationship from one data point to another. You draw a relationship and it says, right, you are stating that there's a relationship here. Please tell us what that relationship is. And there's a few kind of rules, right, in place, not ISO 95, but some rules. The first is we make a distinction between, is it kind of like a known relationship, like known knowledge, or is it exploratory? And the reason why we delineate between the two is sometimes you're going to be drawing relationships between tags and you're going, look, I know what this is. That product counter I'm going to use for my OEE calculation. There is a machine running state over here. I'm going to use that for my uptime calculation. And I'm going to create a delta between bag count here at the robot and the packer over here. And the delta between the two is our yield. And we know it. We're not proving anything. It's not a hypothesis. We know it. So we say, okay, it's known knowledge. Please just describe the relationship, and you can do that through free text. And then we have a bunch of hashtags that the user can come up with. The hashtag denote anything that's abstract. It could be a cluster of knowledge. You could say, please assign these data tags to reliability maintenance because it belongs in that set of reliability maintenance knowledge, or please assign these data tags to this hashtag called 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝘀𝘀. And it's a very simple way of doing it. The whole point of our tool is you're making use of your data within the first hour of connection. And you can scroll, you can zoom. We've created what's called a knowledge graph playground where you can select various assets so that you're not jumping around a massive knowledge graph. But the whole point of the tool is it's human-centered context building for starters. Yeah. Once you've built the context, we have an MCP server that connects into an LLM. We encourage our customers to say, well, go into the LLM and just check whether the context is understood, right? And the LLM will very quickly go, yeah, you've just told me that tag belongs to 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝘀 and you calculate it that way. And you say, great, I'm confident I've got my context. And then you can say of the LLM, right, can you now give me an 𝗹𝗶𝗀 report? And the LLMs are able to do that really, really easily. I mean, frighteningly so. And so once you've done that in our tool, you go, okay, cool, you've given me the 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝘀. What questions are easy? I want to know why, right? And the why questions are a whole lot harder. This is where knowledge graphs become really, really powerful. What are the possible explanations for why my performance was bad? And with the interaction of our knowledge graph with LLMs, you can essentially start to build those very powerful cause and effect relationships. And I think that's where we can really present something new to the market to say, that why things happen, that's that next level. And that is actually built through a call and response of a human saying, well, okay, but that's happened. What about this? And it says, well, actually, we've got a data point there. Would you like me to draw a relationship for that? And with the MCP and Claude or what have you, we can actually write back into our knowledge graph with an AI-assisted context drawing. And that's essentially our tool. So the output is you can use it via MCP, but we also have a whole bunch of standard connectors. You can connect into Snowflake or BigQuery or whatever your data platform, enterprise data platform is. IT professionals love this because they are looking at OT data modeled for the first time without getting a crazy blood pressure. Because, what we've found is IT people get very scared of OT data, and the fact that we can serve it up in a modeled output makes them very happy. So that's essentially the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really such a powerful, tool in my view, because I've been exploring, building AI agents specifically for industrial scenarios, and it has become very clear to me that if we were to succeed in kind of like bringing AI agents into the industrial space, they've got to have something like a knowledge graph, kind of like to give them that grounding, right? So I think that's been very clear, for me, that this is what we're going to need as that foundation as we start to kind of like incorporate all kinds of AI agents into our environments.
Yeah. Look, knowledge graphs, I think trying to build cause and effect relationships within your data and understanding what drives what in an organization, it's not straightforward. Anyone that's done a root cause analysis or trying to get their head around a defect, something may happen one day, it produces a defect, and then the next day it's gone. It's, anyone who's in manufacturing knows it's unpredictable. It's, process variability is it's a difficult, challenging thing. And so being able to rapidly test hypotheses and having 30 possible variables that drive something in a factory and being able to test it and rule it out quickly and move within that window of urgency is the key. And I can't see without knowledge graphs that you can do that, because it would just take too long and you'd miss too much trawling around different hierarchies and things like that. It would, I just don't think it's possible. And so I agree, knowledge graphs are the way to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, you've taken an interesting go-to-market approach, as you've just mentioned, that primarily really your tool plugs into the Ignition's ecosystem, as it were. Could you maybe explain to our audience what drove that decision and how sort of like they may stand to benefit from that?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of reasons. We were very aware already 10 years ago at Ignition taking a foothold in New Zealand and Australia. And I loved it from the outset because of what it stood for. Open standards, convergence, interoperability, not this vendor lockdown, let's try and monetize as much money out of you through locking it down and so forth. And it just really promoted the promise of Industry 4. So from that point of view, we loved Ignition from the outset. When we then looked at what we had built and said, okay, how do we scale this product to around the world? Either we have to, at that stage, look at hardware and edge devices and a whole bunch of stuff that then makes the product fall into this bureaucratic friction where someone, in Singapore or wherever has to approve whether you've got a security worthy edge device, and everything just became painfully slow. And then when we tested can we securely plumb into the Ignition gateway purely as a software as a service play, it was great, it worked. And then inductive automation we're also really, really positive from the outset. They saw our early version and they said, this is great. We would like to promote you into our ecosystem, and they helped a lot to bring this product to where it is today. So that partnership has worked very, very well in a practical sense of, well, it's one of the best ways to get moving, to get your data useful. But at a strategic level, we just love what that company stands for in terms of open standards.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, totally agree how, inductive automation really changed the game with kind of like bringing this idea of openness and being able to plug into many different systems and really use your data in ways that benefit you and not just to try, as you said, make as much money off of you as possible, right? And speaking of that, um, how do you integrate with other IT enterprise systems that may need access to, whatever insight you're generating off of the Ignition platform? Can you talk to us about, how you integrate with other existing system? It could be IT enterprise and perhaps some OT systems.
Yeah. Well, when we go into a site that has a Siemens or a Rockwell, again, we can encourage those customers to get a headless Ignition license, right? You don't even have to buy the whole enterprise license. You can just get the headless connector. There's many ways to do that. Our next focus is really on the non-Ignition connectivity, which is on our roadmap. But in the first instance, our view is, well, there's already thousands of factories, and it's so prominent in New Zealand and in Australia. We're leaning into that. We're not. We're just embarking on the journey of what we're doing. From an IT point of view, we want to be absolutely make it easy. Whether you want to have, we have a GraphQL feature where you can make your own APIs from your data. You've got your standard Google BigQuery, your Snowflake connectors, your Databricks. And what we're trying to say is, and this is one frustrating thing that I think a lot of CIOs have, is people are selling platforms that are trying to be all singing and dancing, right? So they go all the way from connecting to the data, moving it, modeling it, and then they give yet another visualization tool. And these CIOs are going, why? I've just spent all my money investing in Power BI or whatever, Grafana, and now I'm going to have to teach these people how to use another visualization platform. And our strategy's been, no, you use what you want to use. Grafana, whatever, that's up to you. All we want to do is deliver you model data that you can make use of and that you can go back into the knowledge graph to build, unleash that flywheel of data, as we call it, and knowledge. And that's our approach. But part of that is we make it really, really easy to ingest that data into your enterprise data platform. And, you tick off all the big ones: Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, et cetera, et cetera.
So maybe to make it all concrete for our audience here, do you perhaps have some real world implementations or proof points that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of different use cases. To start with, clients in New Zealand. New Zealand, it's high complexity, low volume, versus, say, a factory in the US or Europe, where you may be running, 20 SKUs. In New Zealand, it's small manufacturing, lots of changeability because we don't have a big population over here. And so the use cases have lent themselves to, managing those types of things. But to start with, our use cases begin with, okay, let's get the data tags and build an OEE within a couple of hours, right? And people go from nothing to, okay, we've dragged the data point, we've built the connections between data points to build relationships. We've now got this context layer sitting on top of our raw events, and we can now, for the first time, produce shift reports and daily reports, things that I never had before, and we've done it in a few hours. That is just an amazing use case, I think. But then at the same time, we've done use cases where a classic one is a customer's still getting lots of surprises in their stock takes. And what happens is they're counting every product they make on the shop floor. I'm showing them, look, there it is. And we connect a few dots, you know exactly what you've produced. You know that it's been picked up by a robot. You know that a forklift has picked it up and sent it into stores. There should be no surprises in your stock takes. And so the ability to triangulate that OT data with their warehousing and their ERP data, it's been a real godsend for a number of our clients. That I know this seems crazy, right? Sometimes I tell people that aren't in manufacturing and they say, isn't this like straightforward? And you go, you just don't know what a shop floor looks like sometimes. People can go for years without measuring their processes properly. It's being able to connect the dots with factory data to, say, warehousing. And then obviously a lot of people have talked about this, which is, can you take factory data to start to do condition-based maintenance? So move away from work orders. We do these work orders once a month because that's what's written in our maintenance system. And you go, well, actually, you're over maintaining. You don't need to do that. You do it based on this condition, and guess what? There is a temperature sensor right there that can measure the heat of the bearing, and we've got vibration, and you know what? We can get a pretty good handle on our failure modes, and that actually adds up to a lot of money, because all of a sudden that, don't question it because it came from Mount Sinai, weekly maintenance cycles, you can do monthly and get the same reliability, but spend a lot less on labor and parts. So those are the really big kickers. The stuff that we're doing around root cause analysis and stuff like that, that's sort of cooking right now. Within a few weeks' time, I think we can come back and tell you some powerful use cases there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking forward to learning more about that. Yeah, so I mean, for any leaders or manufacturing leaders who are maybe listening to our conversation right now and then thinking, this sounds great, but how do I start, right? So what's your advice on kind of like how companies should get started with this human-centric approach to data context on the Thread Cloud platform? What does your engagement look like? Can you paint a picture for us?
Yeah, well, my view, and it might be controversial, but don't try and boil the ocean. Okay, don't do it. You'll spend a lot of money. You'll lose control. You'll forget your why, and a year later you would have spent a lot of money, and you would have gone, "Where are we? What are we doing?" My preference much more is start with something simple that's valuable, that's right on the top of your list, right? It's a painkiller, not a vitamin, right? You've got a pain point. And then say, how could my OT data help me solve those problems? And then go and do that, and do it quickly, and do it iteratively, right? With urgency. And once you connect the process of rapid context development and data engineering to, okay, we're getting somewhere, you get this momentum in an organization, right? And that's really, really key. As a consultant, I could pick it, right? When you've got momentum and people know things are about to change, we're accountable, we are taking an insight, we're coming up with an improvement action, we're implementing it. Wow, my production line is now 5% better. Then all of a sudden, these forces of improvement and innovation unleash. And some of it is human and some of it is that data engineering. But the problem is that we go, no, it'll take a year of data engineering, and we've got a bunch of data scientists and data engineers sitting in a dark room over there, and you'll get it eventually. I just don't believe it works. My advice is start small and really test, put it in front of people, test that democratization of data, because everyone will have a different view, a different use. And once you engage those people and you're able to turn that into context quickly, I think that's the recipe for getting the results of industrial data transformation. And I see it's frustrating because sometimes we go into clients and they've already spent their money. And it's frustrating because they go, well, you didn't get anything for it. Can we now show you how we think it can be? And they go, yeah, we might have to wait till next year because we've already spent this year's budget. And so I would say start small and then scale.
Amazing. So before we wrap up our conversation, is there anything else that you like to say to our audience? Anything that we didn't cover in this podcast, or maybe to our audience who are already, planning their trip to, or already at the ICC conference, or maybe someone else who's watching this recording after the fact?
Yeah, well, look, I've watched a couple of your podcasts, and I would say I'm probably the least technical person that, or one of them that you've had on. And, that's for me, I really respect the people in my team that I'm working with and the people I'm going to meet at 𝗍𝗍𝗀𝘀. And I see the frustration. And it's this: senior managers are going to AI talks, and they come back to the organizations and they go to the CIO and say, right, we've got to do something in AI. And if you're in a manufacturing organization, these CIOs are going, well, I don't know, what do I do? Like, I'm trying to show that I'm doing something, but I don't know, do I do some AI over my accounts receivable, or, my the value is sitting in that OT data layer. But OT engineers, that's their domain. But OT engineers are frustrated at the moment because more and more people are asking them about data and saying, look, the world is changing. You can't just be about control systems and SCADA anymore. You got to need to know cloud, and you need to know security, and you need to know data, and you need to know this, and you need to know that. Come on, keep up. And I just sense there's a real frustration because most control engineers, they want to be helpful, but what's being asked of them, it's really, really hard to deliver to the business. And then they get perceived as Dr. No or can't do. And it's because we haven't given them the tools. And I really want to, continue that conversation with thought leaders like yourself around how do we solve that problem? Because the world is changing, but we're not helping these people. We're lecturing them. And so, yeah, that's probably my closing comment. I don't know whether that resonates, given your background.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. So maybe just one last thing with what we do here on the podcast as a tradition is try and get our guests to make a prediction, specifically as far as AI in manufacturing is concerned. So I want to get your sense on where do you see things going in the next, I mean, feel free to pick your own timeline, maybe 2 3 years, or however you see AI really changing manufacturing. What's your prediction on how the factory floor will look like, or how manufacturing enterprises will look like in an AI dominated world?
Wow. It's kind of like asking me when electricity cables were laid in a factory, and then everyone could figure out, hey, we could do night shifts. We don't have to build a new factory, or we can do assembly lines. Or I think that this is a real opportunity to think about how we manage in a different way on the shop floor. The rules around top down and authority and supervision are going to change. I see a much more empowered operator that has information and insight at their fingertips. And I see those roles radically changing over the next 2 to 3 years. And the people that are able to really present innovative solutions to how we manage and self-manage is going to be huge. And I'm really, really interested in how that is going to happen.
Absolutely. Bob, it's been such a fascinating conversation that I've had with you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show and share your insights with our audience. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed it as well.